After another slow road start for Michael Penix, we're breaking down the film to break down which areas of his game we need to see the most improvement in.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the FanDuel app. And also on today's episode, we'll break down the film of the Falcons' Week 7 loss to the 49ers, and we'll be doing a deep dive into the offensive issues. We'll talk about play calling, as well as some of the areas where we need to see Michael Penix's game improve the most. We'll contrast that with why and how the 49ers game plan so well against this very good Falcons defense. We'll give Kyle Pitts his flowers. We'll talk about why we don't have to worry about Jessie Bates as others are, like Jarvis Davis. And we'll talk about McCloud's release as well. But if you don't know who I am, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day, and all you have to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So let's get into the offensive film, and we'll start off before we get into Michael Penix. Let's talk about my general thoughts on the play calling. I thought Zach Robinson's play calling was mostly okay. Certainly I think it's a lot of things that you're fair to criticize, but, I'll give Zach Robinson the benefit of the doubt because I thought he was trying some new stuff. And after spending basically the better part of the last year saying we need to see Zach Robinson evolve and expand the offense, I'm not going to complain when Zach Robinson tries to evolve and expand the offense. I think overall the Falcons' offensive issues were boiled down to poor execution. They just did not execute a lot of the things that they wanted to do this past Sunday night against the 49ers. But one of the best examples of a new wrinkle in this offense that we saw, I think, for the first time ever, was the insert play action pass, where we've spent a lot of time talking about how the Falcons need to marry their run game with their passing game and the play action. And one of their favorite run concepts is having the insert block, where in this case, Drake London sort of inserts into the C gap as a run blocker. And for the first time, I believe that the Falcons have ever run it. They had him running a route on that particular play. It came on the second series late in the first quarter. It resulted in an incomplete pass and I think there was a penalty on Ryan Newsome for an ineligible receiver downfield. But it was nice to sort of see it took a while, but we finally got that. So hopefully we'll continue to see more strides in that arena. But let's talk about Michael Penix, the big topic of the week. And I want to make this clear before we get into this. This is not meant to be a referendum on Michael Penix. This is purely a data point. I'm going to be critical of Michael Penix. I know a lot of the discourse you're seeing elsewhere is being very critical and saying Michael Penix isn't the answer. I don't believe any of that nonsense. This is a data point. And then at the end of the season, we'll have a full evaluation of Michael Penix, hopefully as a full year starter. And we will look at this data point as well as several others along the way. And we will see the data points at the end of the season. And we'll basically assess, is it trending up? Is it staying even? Is it trending down? That's, to me, what matters. So, it's one of those things where, someone in the Discord, I thought, put it very eloquently the other day, where he basically said, everyone says rookies need time to develop until it's their time. Then it needs to be Super Bowl or bust, or he's a bust. And I feel like that is a lot of the discourse surrounding Michael Penix at this point in time. But let's get into some of my issues with Michael Penix. I think the main issues I had was he struggled early in this game, right? And so, this has been a through line for the Falcons and Michael Penix through his short time as a starter with slow road starts. And I do think he did start to settle in the second half, particularly in the third quarter after the Bijan touchdown. And then at that point, he kind of got derailed because the 49ers threw a blitz at him, and he had a potential hot route on an inbreaker to Kyle Pitts. He didn't quite pull the trigger on that. He tried to escape the pocket and wound up getting hit on that play, leading to an incomplete pass. And that just kind of is illustrative of some of the main topics I want to talk about when we really isolate Michael Penix himself, right? It's attacking the middle of the field, it's the play extending ability, and it's how the Falcons handle the blitz, right? That play I just mentioned was one of 3 plays that I cited in my notes where I felt like the Falcons had an opportunity to attack the 49ers over the middle of the field, and Penix didn't pull the trigger on any of those throws. Now, to be fair, in all 3 instances, he was under pressure, right? And so, it's the question of, is Penix beating the allegations that he doesn't like attacking the middle of the field? And in this game, he was certainly hesitant when there was pressure, when it came time to making tight window throws under duress over the middle of the field. And so, my thoughts on the Falcons' ability, this offense's overall beyond Penix's ability to attack the middle of the field, I think is perfectly summarized by a tweet that Trayshawn Diaz of the Falcoholic had after the game. He said the Falcons have a limited menu of middle of the field concepts that they've used since 2024. Kirk, a very efficient middle of the field thrower, was able to make do. But Penix isn't. He isn't comfortable attacking that part of the field, and there's no fix besides taking more shots and learning through reps. So I generally agree with Trayshawn's point there. Again, this is a data point, and we'll see if this improves or gets worse over the course of the season, and we'll keep an eye on it. But we'll talk, and we'll keep an eye on both on Penix's ability to attack it, as well as the play calling doing a better job, featuring that area of the field. But talking about the play extending ability, he did try to do that a little bit more in this game than we've seen to date. And to me, in some ways, it's a form of progress, but it remains a work in progress because he wasn't very efficient when he did it. Now, I know his success rate, according to PFF, when he's throwing outside the pocket this season is about 38%. That's in the bottom third of the NFL. And if you go a couple of spots higher on the rankings, that's where you usually get around 40+% is in terms of success rate, is where most of the good quarterbacks, like all the quarterbacks that are below Michael Penix, are like not good quarterbacks, basically, or at least guys that aren't playing at a super high level. And so we just need to get him a little bit higher. We need to get him in the 40s when it comes to making plays outside the pocket. And it matters because when you're a young quarterback, you're not always going to have the right answers, right? When it comes to getting beyond that first read, you got to get to the right answers. And to me, that was an issue at times in this 49ers game on a select couple of plays, but you don't have that right answer initially. And you got to get to the right answer, and oftentimes that requires you to extend the play, go off structure, second reaction, whatever you want to call those plays. And it's not that Penix lacks the instincts to do that. They don't necessarily worry me. The only concern I have from an instinctual standpoint is he has a tendency to want to roll left and rather than roll right, even when there's an opening to the right, with a collapsing pocket. But it's just mostly when it comes time to actually making those throws on the run to open receivers, he's missing too many of those throws, and that's leading to the Falcons not having as many of those second reaction plays that you want to have, particularly for a young quarterback that's still developing. And so just can we make some more catchable passes in those situations? Now, when it comes to the Falcons handling of the blitz, right, this is less of a Penix issue and more of a Zach Robinson issue. I felt like the 49ers really did a good job catching the Falcons slipping in this area. We talked about that a little bit on the previous episodes this week. We talked about with Locked On 49ers host Brian Peacock last week on the Crossover Thursday, how the 49ers don't do a great job of sort of supplementing their pass rush with a blitz in Nick Bosa's absence. Well, it felt like in this game, they borrowed a page from the Falcons last week against the Bills and dialed up similar blitz concepts, and they caught the Falcons slipping a couple of times. I noted in my notes at least 10 instances where the 49ers dialed up pressure, and on those 10 plays, the Falcons were successful on just one of those 10 plays. And I think it's owed to a variety of factors, but two main ones are, too often in those situations, the Falcons had long developing routes, and in other situations, receivers just weren't getting open, right? And when you have those long developing routes, when teams blitz, you want to get the ball out quickly, right? Because pressure is coming, right? And there were too many times where Penix was kind of forced to hold on to the ball a beat too long versus that pressure, and that came via the Falcons having longer developing routes on those plays, including the play where Penix got injured in the fourth quarter was one such instance where the 49ers brought a blitz. They had long developing routes, and Penix really had no outlet on that particular play. And the other thing that stood out was, you heard Raheem mention this on Monday, that, the 49ers dialed up a little bit more man coverage than they thought they were expected to. And I looked it up, and the 49ers, according to PFF, had played 15% man coverage in the first 6 weeks of the season. And then they dialed it up to about 35% against the Falcons. And unfortunately for the Falcons, guys weren't winning in those situations, right? Except for one, Kyle Pitts. We'll break into him and break that down later. But I'm not one of these people that thinks, because guys weren't winning against man coverage in this game or in other games, that means that the Falcons got to go out there and trade for a new wide receiver. I just think the players currently on the team, including the quarterback, again, we're talking specifically about, separating from man coverage, they just got to perform better. But in terms of just overall fixes to the Falcons' problems, that's basically the fix to their problems. Guys have to play better. And usually this team, when they have a poor performance like that, they respond the following week and play better. And so hopefully we'll get that from them this weekend against Miami. But, this is not the first time we've had conversations on this podcast about guys not winning consistently against man coverage. I recall last year, particularly in the second half of last year, where there were times where teams were able to man up this Falcon team. I remember that first quarter of that second Saints game in week 10, where the Falcons got off to a slow start, in large part because the Saints were like, we're going to man up your receivers, and our guys weren't winning in those situations. Eventually they did start winning, but it was a little too late at that point in the game for the Falcons to pull off that win. But we'll get into more of those situations when we explore the extended all 22 review, which I'll plug at the end of today's episode. But, as I mentioned earlier, the Falcons did not have good answers for the 49ers blitz, but the 49ers had great answers for the Falcons blitzes. And we'll break into that. And that will get us into a conversation on, the whole notion of this team getting outcoached as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So with the NFL season in the midst, we're almost at the end of October, you want to go check it out and get back into the stadium, especially if you want to be in Mercedes-Benz to root your favorite team on. And a great place to go to be able to get back into the stadium is with Gametime, right? The Gametime is fast, easy. It's backed by the Gametime guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time at the best price, plus with all fees included. The price you see is the price you pay, and what you see is what you get with those panoramic seat views before you buy. So Gametime, they make it super simple on the app. And so go check it out and take the guesswork out of buying tickets by downloading the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And if Mercedes-Benz Stadium, $20 can go a long way towards concessions. So terms apply. Again, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. So as I said on yesterday's episode, I do think watching the film, I was a little skeptical of saying this on the rapid reaction, but after watching the film, I do think the Falcons did get out coached. But as I said on yesterday's episode and tried to explain, I don't think that's indicative of the Falcons coaches doing a bad job. I think this is just more testament to the 49ers having good coaches, right? And just similar to how we don't do referendums on quarterbacks on a weekly basis here, we're not going to try to do referendums on coaches, right? We're going to talk about how they performed in each game, but the deciding factor, not every game has to be the deciding factor when it comes to whether Zach Robinson's a good play caller or whether Raheem Morris is the long-term answer and it can be the guy that's going to lead this team to a Super Bowl. Like, just like Penix, we're going to evaluate all these coaches at the end of the season, and we're just going to wait and see how the entire season plays out before we sit here and definitively plant our flag on, are these coaches worth bringing back in 2026? But I am on today's episode going to give Kyle Shanahan his flowers on this episode. And if you happen to be a Falcon fan that hates, hearing praise of Kyle Shanahan, I apologize in advance. I know there are still many Falcon fans to this day that feel like Kyle Shanahan's a bad coach or overrated. And my response to those people is they are entitled to their opinion, but they are just simply wrong, right? And similar to how the Falcons out-coached or out-schemed the Bills last week, particularly with their blitzes, the 49ers watched the film of that game and made good adjustments like good coaches are supposed to do. And they kind of plan for, okay, we don't want the Falcons to kill us with their blitzes like they killed the Bills. So we're going to give our quarterback good answers to that. We're going to avoid those situations. We're going to use the run game. We're going to use the quick passing game. And so we're going to have answers for their blitz. And the Falcons did not have those same answers for the 49ers blitz, as I mentioned earlier. And that led to a dichotomy between their success and our success. But, one of the things that we were worried about going into this game was the use of play action. But I think the 49ers didn't, I don't think they ran a single play action pass in the first half of the game. And, in hindsight, it's like, oh, well, play action is too long a developing play, right? That's giving the pass rushers and potential blitzers too much time to get home, right? And so instead, we're just going to go for the 7 to 15-yard completions on in-breakers and checkdowns. When they send pressure, we're going to throw into that void, right? We're going to allow Mac Jones to get rid of the ball quickly. And then you couple that with the run game, that kept them ahead of the chains, out of long downs and distance for the most part. I heard post-game that Kyle Shanahan said their goal was to run the ball 40 times in this game. I believe they had 36 designed runs in this game, if I'm not mistaken. And he praised the entire 49ers team for achieving that, right? Because you need your offense to be able to execute that game plan. You need your defense to be able to get stops so that you don't necessarily have to play from behind like the Falcons were forced to later in the game. And you also need your special teams to help out in that regard. And the 49ers got that, right? They got the complete 3-phase experience that the Falcons experienced the previous week against the Bills, right? And so that's where it's just like, it's not necessarily an indictment of this coaching staff that the shoe was on the other foot. Last week, the Falcons were favorable in that situation. This week, the 49ers were favorable in that situation. That is how this often works in the NFL, and it's one of the reasons why I'm not as broken up as other people are about this loss. I'm disappointed, as I am always disappointed when the Falcons lose football games, but like, it's not one of those things where it's like, this is the end of the world. That's what I mean when I say like, this is not really a referendum. So, hopefully we will see, this is an issue with the Falcons when it comes to the slow starts and not performing at a high level on the road. And as we've said before, like, for the Falcons' next 6 games are going to be on the road. And it's got to get better when it comes to this coaching staff and playing better on the road. And you want to be in a position where in those 4 road games over the next 6 weeks, you want to go at least 2-2, if not 3-1 or better, to keep your playoff hopes alive. And if you don't perform better than what the Falcons did against this 49ers team, you're going to be potentially staring at 1-3 or 0-4. And at that point, your season might be over. And so we will see. But now I'm going to throw some numbers at you guys when it comes to the Falcons pressure and blitz and the 49ers success rate. And I know some of you guys' eyes glaze over when I start throwing numbers at you. But based off my charting of the Falcons defense, they pressured the 49ers about 46% of the time. They got better pressure in the second half, 33% pressure rate in the first half, 62% in the second half. The Falcons had a 36% blitz rate, but San Francisco's success rate when the Falcons blitz was 60% this week. And then when you look at San Francisco's success rate when the Falcons did get pressure, it was 38%. In the first half, it was 20%, and then that improved to 50% in the second half. And then San Francisco's success rate when the Falcons did not get pressure was 80%, which is an extremely high number. In the first half, that was 70%. In the second half, that was 100%. And so, Mac Jones wasn't great against pressure when the Falcons did get it. But the 49ers, again, gave him good answers when he saw blitz, when he reckoned he was decisive and recognized blitz and was able to get the ball out quickly. And so that mitigated a lot of the pressure, which is why the Falcons pressure rate, in my opinion, in the first half was so low, relatively speaking to what we expected it to be. And so, that second half improvement for the 49ers offense was owed to, making good in-game adjustments and seeing what the Falcons were doing. Like, okay, this is how they're attacking us. Let's, make these adjustments. And they did a better job in the second half. But I do think the Falcons defense overall did play better from my eyes in the second half than they did in the first, but it didn't really matter all that much. And, McCaffrey not only gave the Falcons problems on the ground as a runner, he also gave them problems in the air as a pass catcher, as a check down and quick outlet. The success rate on the 8 targets to Christian McCaffrey was 88%. So they were successful in 7 of those 8 throws to McCaffrey. The lone failure was a attempted screen that David Onyemata was able to bust up, and a big challenge for why they couldn't deal with Christian McCaffrey, of course, had to deal with Divine Diablo's early injury. Now, even the one rep that Diablo had before he got injured, he got beat by McCaffrey on an option route. So it wasn't even guaranteed that Divine Diablo was going to lock down Christian McCaffrey in this game. But basically, he was the only guy that really had a realistic chance in this game at that linebacker position. And so once he exited, Christian McCaffrey just was basically able to do whatever he wanted for the remainder of the game. And so, obviously, as we discussed on yesterday's episode, we're not expecting Divine Diablo for a couple more games. But, a player that we will not be seeing for presumably the remainder of the season is Ray McCloud, who was just released on Tuesday. We'll break that down as well as give Kyle Pitts his flowers as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. With us in the middle of the NFL season, FanDuel wants to continue to keep you invested with this can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the FanDuel app. And FanDuel gives you so many different ways to win, whether we're talking football, basketball, baseball, all the sports. You got the same game parlays, you got the player props, you got the straight up money line bets, or you can bet against the spread. The Falcons are 7.5-point favorites at home against this Miami Dolphins team. So if you want to take advantage of any of these offers, make sure you head on over to FanDuel.com and download the FanDuel app today to get started. So the Falcons released Ray McCloud on Tuesday. It felt like once he became a healthy scratch for the 49ers game after initially being a healthy scratch for the Bills game, it felt like the writing was on the wall that Ray had played his last down in Atlanta. At that point, Raheem in his presser on Monday said, that it's an issue between Ray and him alone. So, hopefully we'll get some more clarity and some more insight. Hopefully one of these NFL insiders will get the scoop on this. But it sounds like there was an incident between Raheem and Ray during the bye week. And we'll see. It's reminiscent of when Raheem was the interim head coach and there was an incident with Tack McKinley, but that incident was basically Tack going on Twitter and ripping the team. And that ultimately led to Tack's release, which is what I think Tack was trying to do. But anyway, that's a separate conversation. So, losing Ray, I think is a blow. He had been marginalized in the offense. Maybe that has something to do with the incident. But he had basically been marginalized in the offense in part due to the emergence of Kyle Pitts, who we'll talk about later. I think losing him is a bigger blow on special teams than it is on offense, given that he's, to me, Jamal Agnew had a good game against the 49ers. So hopefully it won't be as big an issue now. But prior to Jamal Agnew's big 45-yard return against the 49ers, I thought Ray had been the team's most effective kickoff returner so far this year. But it still is a notable loss on offense because basically after your big four pass catchers and Pitts, Drake, Bijan, Mooney, in whatever order you want to put those guys in, Ray is your most proven fifth option, right? And so if you need a fifth guy out there, as often is the case when you're throwing the football, right? You have 5 receivers in the route, 1 quarterback and 5 offensive linemen. Ray was your best option compared to the rest of this Falcons receiver core, right? His body of work is light years better than any other pass catcher, but his departure is going to give opportunities for those other pass catchers to close the gap, right? And improve their body of work. Casey Washington, David Sills, several practice squad players on the roster. I don't expect the Falcons to go after outside wide receiver help. I've seen people throw around Tyler Lockett, who I believe was just released by the Titans. I've seen people for the last 3 weeks talking about the Falcons making a trade at the trade deadline. I've said several times over the last several months, I want to see this team develop their young players. And rather than trying to get outside fixes. And that applies to JD Bertrand getting an opportunity with Divine Diablo. That applies to Casey Washington or Nick Nash or Chris Blair. We're on Team Blair here on this podcast because we basically believe that Drake London is by far the best slot receiver on this team, and give me an outside wide receiver that can do some damage. And Chris Blair to me is probably your best outside wide receiver out beyond Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Darnell Mooney. So speaking of Kyle Pitts being on the outside, it's time to give Kyle Pitts some flowers on this podcast, right? He was the best player on the Falcons offense in this 49ers game. He was the one guy that was consistently able to beat man coverage. And so most of the time, when the few times the Falcons did have success against the 49ers man coverage, it was most often when they were throwing to Kyle Pitts. And I feel like this is one of the best games that he's played in his Falcon career. I think this is probably in the top three to five games, even if it doesn't necessarily pop in terms of the box score, in terms of his performance. And, the reason why we want to do this and we want to take time to do this is because, we spend a lot of time over the last year talking about what Kyle Pitts isn't, what he is, how he's utilized in the offense. And I've been someone who's firmly been in the Kyle Pitts corner, that this guy has a lot of ability that is untapped in the 2024 version of the Falcons offense under Zach Robinson. And I feel like they are tapping fully into, maybe not fully, but they're tapping quite a bit into that potential in this year's version of the offense. And I think you saw that on display against the 49ers. You saw the separation, you saw the body control, you saw the clean route running. Like, this is everything that we've wanted from Kyle Pitts these last several years in this game. And unfortunately, it came in a loss for the Falcons, so it's going to get overshadowed. We'll do a full breakdown of it on the extended all 22 for the listeners, for the Locked On Falcons insiders. But I mentioned this on yesterday's or Monday's Falcon Squad show over at Locked On Sports Atlanta, that Kyle Pitts is well on track for someone paying him. He's having that infamous contract year bump or whatever. I don't know if the Falcons are going to be the team that pays him this offseason. Again, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it in the offseason. But he is absolutely living up to his billing right now as we sit here as one of the top 5 tight ends in the NFL, right? Whether he's putting up the production of a top 5 tight end, I don't know. But I think he's performing like a top 5 tight end, and hopefully we will see this trend continue for Kyle Pitts for the remainder of the season. But the last thing I will say before we duck out of here is, Jarvis Davis, I know you sometimes listen to these episodes, so I'm talking to you and all these other listeners that, no one listens to the show because, you've seen the numbers. Go back to a couple of weeks ago for that reference. But, I wasn't ready because I hadn't done all the film study at that point on yesterday's Falcon Squad show. I wasn't ready to offer a rebuttal to your Jessie Bates comments, but now I am after I've watched the film. And Jarvis called out Jessie, said Jessie's not playing well, the tackling, and all that's fair criticism. But I've seen a lot of people, not just Jarvis Davis, sort of talk about, do we need to have a conversation about Jessie Bates? And I'm going to hear on this podcast and say, no, we do not need to have a conversation about Jessie Bates. Yes, you can sit there and say there's been a handful of uncharacteristic, instances where his cheating has burned the Falcons, right? Figuratively and literally a handful. Like, we're talking like 3 times. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know the perception is going to be like, no, it's been way more. It's like 3 times, guys, in like 6 games. Like, calm down, right? And the tackling was not particularly good against the 49ers. That is a fair criticism of Jessie Bates, but the tackling was not good for anybody on the Falcons defense. And so singling out Jessie Bates, who is not, Keanu Neal, is not Cam Chancellor, is not a run thumping, is not Malik Mustafa for the 49ers, a run thumping safety, feels unfair to me to single him out and be like, his tackling is bad and ignore everybody else's, right? And so the last point I will say about Jessie Bates is he has been very underrated when coverage, right? We're focused on the splash plays, the big explosive, the big touchdown that he gives up, or the lack of interceptions that he's not getting. And so the people hyper focus on the handful of splash plays that Jessie Bates is not making or being victimized on, and ignoring the 95% of plays in between those two extremes where he is playing outstanding football for the most part. Again, minus a handful of missed tackles, right? Because I sit here and I'm watching the film now, Jarvis, and anybody else who's out here coming for Jessie Bates, right? We do not believe in monogamy here on the Locked On Falcons podcast. So we will support our polyamorous king in Jessie Bates. But why do you think George Kittle was so quiet in this game? Did you want George Kittle? What did he have any catches? 2 targets, whatever it was, right? You know who was primarily responsible for covering George Kittle for the vast majority of this game? It was Jessie Bates. Jessie Bates has been outstanding in coverage, even if it isn't resulting in interceptions this year. He has been one of the Falcons' best coverage, arguably, based off my charting of the Falcons defense. I have to update the numbers for week 7, but it's like Divine Diablo and Jessie Bates are like the 2 best coverage guys on the team through the first 6 games of the season. And I think because Diablo got beat on the one coverage play, or they were the 2 best in man coverage, I think is what my charting said. And because Diablo gave up 1 reception in this game, he now moves to second place, I think. And Jessie Bates is the team's best man coverage defender on the entire roster based off my charting this current season. So we are not worried about Jessie Bates, guys. Again, y'all can come for the king, but he's sitting on his throne. All right, so that's it for that conversation. We'll be breaking it down fully. If you're, rather than just listening to me talk about the plays, you want to see me break down the plays, becoming a Locked On Falcons insider may be for you for the extended all 22 review. We'll be looking at all these topics as well as other things this week. And you can become an insider by joining at the link in the description and below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. It is a 14-day free trial. So you can check out this film analysis for free right now if you sign up, right? That'll be available probably for you guys Wednesday. So if you sign up on Tuesday night, it'll be probably there for you Wednesday afternoon or whatever. A 14-day free trial. And then $4.99 a month thereafter if you like it. So you can get this breakdown, you'll get the Dolphins breakdown, and you'll probably, depending on the timing of when you sign up, you wait till Thursday, you'll probably get the Patriots breakdown for free before you have to pay a single cent. So why not become a Locked On Falcons insider? There's every incentive for it, as well as you got my reaction to the Ray release hours ago, however many hours before you're listening to this episode, immediately after it was announced, within 5 minutes of it being announced. That's one of the benefits of being a Locked On Falcons insider is you get the immediate reaction as opposed to having to wait for the podcast. So that is there for you. Continue to make us your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out Locked On NFL as your second listen. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow we will be doing a crossover Thursday with Locked On Dolphins host Kyle Krabs.